So, Abdel Nasser?
Yes. I hope I'm ready.
Okay.
Can we start?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Welcome everybody. Welcome peers. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us to share with us your experience. And in this, especially in this difficult time, where we have to apply some changes in our lives and continue progressing in doing what we like to do as a sport, as athletics. Certainly the COVID-19 changes a lot of habits in our lives, but still we need to live with this in the future. So it changes our habits, it changes our lives, it changes a lot of things. So we have to adapt all what we are doing and proceed and go forward. Welcome, Piers, and the floor is yours.
So, Piers, I just mute everybody, then I'll transfer to you.
Great. Just let me know when, and I'll share the screen if I can as well.
Then I'll make you the host. Just
sure, thank you.
Unmute, Piers.
Let me just share my screen and then I'll start.
Yeah, wait. I transfer the host to you now.
Okay.
Nasser, unmute. And now I'll make you the... You are the host, Piers. You can go ahead.
Great. Let me just pull this up here and try and get a bit of visuals for everybody.
Yeah. Good.
Everybody can see my screen?
Yep.
Great. Well, good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be on this call with everybody. It's 10 o'clock in the morning on the west coast of Ireland. So I know we have people from South America and the United States and Asia and Africa, and as well as some in Europe as well. So it's really a pleasure to be speaking to you all. It's 10 o'clock here in Ireland. We have been in lockdown for 1 week now, and we have another lockdown for 5 weeks, which means we can only travel 5 kilometers from our home. So it's very, very challenging times for everybody at the moment. I'm delighted to say that I have Wi-Fi and I have power, because we've also had a very heavy storm overnight, and a lot of the houses where I live are without electricity. So as much as you think that this is an easy call to make, it was a challenge in the end, but I'm very, very happy and proud to be speaking to you all. So first of all, just to introduce the topic, challenges of the COVID-19 on the World Athletics calendar. Now, I live in the real world, as all of you do, and I know there's a lot more exciting topics than the World Athletics calendar to discuss. Surin was very keen that we do it. I don't have exciting videos or exciting photographs to show you of a calendar, but I hope what we're going to discuss will be interesting to you all. I hope you will ask some questions. There's not a huge amount you can say about the World Athletics calendar, but it might be interesting for some of you to understand what goes on behind the scenes, particularly on the year that we've had in 2020. And when you look back now, and I was only when I was doing the presentation, I realized that, you know, the Olympics was only changed last March, and this is October. So it has certainly been a challenging year for the sport, but it's great that the sport consultancy has done such great work to keep us all engaged on a Saturday morning. I tried to join as many calls as I have on a Saturday, and it's been a really good job. So thank you to Surin and his team. So Surin set the agenda of what he wanted to discuss in 3 parts. And I've adapted a number of presentations I've done. So the first part was the concept of harmonization of the World Athletics calendar. The second part was the challenges of COVID-19, which might be interesting for you just to see how World Athletics have adapted themselves. And then the third part, which maybe isn't as easy for me to do, because my knowledge is probably the same as everybody else on the call, is the way forward and what the future will hold for us. And I think the reality is, as I said, that, you know, most of Europe is now in a lockdown. You know, the United States isn't in better shape. I've been speaking to my friends in China, and they're in good shape, but they live in a different environment to us. So I think the way forward is going to be very challenging to give you a picture, but at least I can tell you what we in World Athletics are doing. And maybe just to give you a little bit of a background to it. So first of all, let me explain the global calendar situation before 2020. So everything I'm telling you about here was before COVID-19 had such a dramatic effect on our lives. This is the situation as we had it. So World Athletics published separate annual calendars for everything. So there was a WAS calendar, what we call the World Athletics series of events. And that included is the World Championships, the World Indoors, the World Under-20s, the World Cross Country, the World Race Walking Team Championships, and the World Relays. So there was always a calendar at IAAF level and World Athletics level for the WAS events. Then there was a separate calendar for the Diamond League events, for the one-day meetings. Then there was a calendar for the World Challenge, which obviously ended last year with the creation of the Continental Tour. And then there were separate calendars again for the cross-country pyramid meetings, the combined events pyramid meetings, and the race walking challenges. And none of those calendars were linked up at all. So if anybody gave a simple question and said, okay, on Saturday, October 31, is there anything happening that we can't have an online seminar for? The answer was you would have to go searching all these different places to try to find a conclusion to that. So it was obviously very, very challenging, and it was something that I spoke about with President Sebastian Coe a number of times. And he also got that feedback from stakeholders, whether it was broadcasters or the media. So he wanted to tackle this situation. On top of the World Athletics situation, we had the continental areas, and they published their annual calendars normally about this time. So normally around October, November, you would receive the calendar for the following calendar year. And again, the areas would only try to avoid the WAS events, the World Athletics series of events. There wasn't a lot of dialogue going on. And then after we had the World calendar and the area calendar, we had the national federations, and they published their calendars, and they pick events like national championships, etc., at the end of the season. So it was all very broken up, and it was all very separate, and it wasn't really logical from the point of view of a coordinated calendar. As I said, there was no single source of truth. There was no global athletics calendar. And then we had a situation. I'll just give you two examples of the conflicts of the situations which happened this year in 2020. So the Diamond League, the Prefontaine Classic in Eugene, was fixed for the same day as the German National Championships. So many of you mightn't realize the complexity of that, but the reality is that Nike fund the Diamond League in the Prefontaine, and Nike also sponsor the German athletics team. So this would have been the Olympic trials in Germany. Germany are one of the few countries in the world that have about 40 or 50,000 spectators at their national championships. And of course, the result was there was a huge fight between the athletes saying, well, I'm contracted to Nike to run in the Prefontaine Classic. I'm also contracted to my club to compete in the German national championships. And I also have to qualify for the Olympics and make the German team. So clearly, everybody was a loser there. The German Federation, the Prefontaine organisers, and the athletes. And I would even suggest the TV viewer, because at the end of the day, if you watch a Diamond League event in the United States, we want to see the best athletes compete against the best athletes. And then we had a situation, that was in June, I think it was June the 7th this year, we had a situation then when everything was rechanged, World Athletics set a national championship window, which I'll discuss a little bit later on. But the British Championships couldn't go ahead on that date, and they went ahead in September because they got a date with the BBC. And by coincidence, the Brussels Diamond League was on the same night as the British Championships was on live on TV. Same situation. Mo Farah set a world record in Brussels for the 1 hour run, and the British Championships, which had BBC and all the sponsors and all the federation, all the athletes involved, was relegated to a non-story. So it really did challenge the British Championships. And then just to give you one more little bit of a situation about the problems of the calendar, if it's not in a coordinated fashion, is that UK Athletics fund 72 athletes. So there's 72 athletes funded by British Athletics. Of the 72, 12 competed in the British Championships, and the other 60 decided to go to Diamond League in Brussels or the Continental Tour in Poland or in Marseille on the same time, and they decided not to compete in the championships. So again, everybody loses. And the British Championships is the oldest national championships in the world. It's a really important federation for World Athletics, as is Germany. And it's clear to see before this year happened, and this is before COVID, of course, that the calendar was just completely uncoordinated and there was nobody responsible for it. We also regularly had clashes with things like, the European Under-23 Championships clash with the World University Games. Again, it's the same age group of athletes, both forced to make a choice over what competition to go with. And a lot of the time we'd have a national championships included in that as well. And the reality was everybody loses and the competitions are so much weaker. So fundamentally, the real problem was there was just no long-term planning. Things were done in, I would say, a kind of a haphazard way, and there was no long-term planning done. So this needed to be addressed by World Athletics. So in order to address it, World Athletics President Sebastian Coe established a global calendar unit in January of this year. So just to be clear with everybody, in January 2020, COVID was something that happened in far off China. It hadn't reached Europe, it hadn't reached the United States. So this was planned for a number of months before January, but it was launched in January. And Sebastian Coe asked me would I be the director of it, which I was quite happy to do because I'd obviously realised the problems that existed. Seb then picked representatives from all 6 geographical continental areas, and we included in that Diamond League organisers, the Continental Tour organisers, the major national federations, and key industry experts. Excuse me. So the mission of the Global Calendar Unit was very, very simple. The job was to lead, manage and coordinate all parts of the global athletics calendar from World Championships back to National Championships and everything then in between. So it was a coordination fashion. I should say actually most national federations plan their calendar in quite a good way, in quite a logical, coherent way. The problem, as far as we were concerned, was that World Athletics wasn't actually at that level of the National Championships. The Global Calendar Unit then liaised with the areas and the member federations and the meeting organisers to ensure a long-term date harmonisation and a coordinated approach was taken to the sport's major fixtures. We agreed a global calendar hierarchy of events and championships and games, and then we agreed long-term protected national championship dates for the next number of years. So that was actually a really important thing to do, was protect the national championships for the benefit of the athletes and of the national federations. So then, who is the Global Calendar Unit? And I'm happy to share with you the membership of the unit. And I just read a few names there because many of you will know them, but you can see it's a fairly heavy set of people. Elio Gesta de Merlo is the president of Consoldate, which is South American Athletic Federation. Cherry Alexander was the meet director of all the Diamond Leagues in Britain, and she's vice president of European Athletics. Yvonne Mullins is Australian. She's the executive director of Oceania Athletics. Jackson Tui, who many of you will know, is the president of Athletics Kenya. Alphonse Yuke, president of Euro Meetings, which is all the one-day meetings that take place in Europe. Duffy Mahoney from the United States is the chief of sport performance. So his job is to produce the medals for USA at every Olympics and World Championships. Anna Riccardi is a World Athletics Council member with a lot of experience. Yuki Oseki, who I think is on the call, is the International Affairs Director of the Japanese Athletic Federation. Jean-Pierre Chaubel was the Diamond League calendar coordinator. Gavin Yang Feng is the competition director for China. We clearly wanted the big federations involved. We had Vadim Nigmatov, who's the European Athletics calendar head. Lamin Fati from Senegal is the general secretary of African Athletics. And then myself as the coordinator in the middle. And we meet like we are doing now on online calls and emails and on a regular basis whenever there's an issue. So, sorry, before I go to the next slide, just to say to you again, we're now in January 2020. So I think we all expected life to be reasonably unexciting. Calendar was an Excel sheet for a number of people in the years to come. We didn't expect to be doing quite the amount of work we're doing now. But then we all know, of course, that the world came to a head in March and a number of things changed. But just to explain, one thing I mentioned previously was the global calendar hierarchy and how that works. I mean, you know, we can have 2 or 3 events on this call. We can all say we're having our event on October 31st. And at the end, somebody has to make a decision to say, well, your event can happen and your event can't happen on that date. So we created a global calendar hierarchy and we divided all the different stakeholders by level of importance. And this is only with the calendar. So, of course, level 1 was the Olympics, the World Athletics Series events, and the area or the continental championships. So they always will get priority when you're setting the calendar dates in the future. And then we made a bold step and we said level 2 were the national championships. So they got more priority in the calendar than the Diamond League or the Continental Tour Gold meetings. And that's really important because at the end of the day, the national championships are the last of the amateur sport. It's for your love and honor of competing. And it's also for, you know, there's no financial reward for being the champion of your country. But that is, in most countries, the biggest day of athletics of the year, the national championships. So we create that a priority of second place of level 2. Then we had the Diamond League and the Continental Tour. Then underneath that, we had the multi-sport games, the National Federation permanent meets, etc. So the key thing was to have the best athletes competing against each other as often as possible without having clashes. And that might seem like an easy thing to do, but it certainly had a number of challenges going forward. So phase one of the development was to create the single source of truth. So a one-stop shop, which is constantly a one-stop shop for a calendar, which is constantly updated with information for the next 4 years. So I've explained what was there before 2020. This now exists on the World Athletics calendar, and you're welcome to go in and have a look at it. This is not secret information. This is available to the public. You just go in and you get the calendar in the World Athletics website, and then you can press in the filters and you can see what's on in July 2021. So it's great when your family say, can we go on holidays here or there, or what's on next August, what's on in June, even what's on in June 2023 and 2024. And we have all those dates as much as possible up until the Paris Olympic Games. And obviously in the next 2 or 3 months, we'll start opening 2025. But in terms of what's on that calendar now, all the World Athletics Series events, the area championships in all ages and disciplines, all the Wanda Diamond League and the Continental Tour Gold, Silver and Bronze events, all the area internationally permitted events, protected dates for the national championships. So these are no-go areas for any meetings. The World Athletics labeled road races. And then we wanted to include as well the prize money available for each meeting, which includes in the world rankings, etc. And we want every meeting on the calendar to enhance, support and add value to the world rankings, which it was a big goal, but we're delighted to say that this calendar was launched in July. It's been a huge help to everybody. It didn't exist before. And as I say, for all of you guys, you can go on it after the call. It's there for everybody to see. Phase two of the development is about where we want to go long term. We wanted to develop and professionalize and commercialize the global calendar unit, build on the success of phase one. We also want to define how events get a place on the calendar. So we want to ensure events, abide by the rules of the global sporting body. We've had a number of events. For example, a street athletics event will take place the same day as a Diamond League. And if Adidas are sponsoring the street athletics event, they will get all the Adidas athletes to a street athletics event. The Diamond League is all the poor, and the sport then is the poor. So we have to have certain equipment in our armory to ensure that events want to be on our calendar and ensure there's a value placed on it. So that's basically the first part of the presentation about where we are with the global calendar. As you can see, it's a big task. It's not an easy task to do it all, but it's certainly helpful for the sport. It's helpful for the athletes. You can already see, I noticed in August and September, athletes were saying it's great to have the calendar for next year. They can plan their training. Of course, the COVID element of life, isn't clear for anybody at the moment. Many of you will have seen yesterday that the World Indoor Tour was launched for 2021. That's another one of my jobs. There was 6 meetings in that last year. There's over 30 meetings in it this year. So in an ideal world, that's going to be a great value and a great success for the athletes. In reality, if you ask me, are those events going to take place? I can't say. I can say to you, if the events were taking place next week, they probably wouldn't. But as human beings, we all need a bit of hope and to look forward. So that's the start. As I say, Søren has planned out the 3 different areas for discussion. That's the introduction and the overall kind of global picture. As I say, it's not the most exciting topic in the world, but if anybody has any questions, I'm very happy to take them, or otherwise, Søren, I'll hand it back to you to control the next section.
Yeah. Yes, we can. We don't have any questions in the chat room. So what we can do, PS, is that you continue as the host and take the second part, and we reserve all the questions and the discussions after the last session. I think it will be more interesting like this.
Great. Listen, I'm happy to do that, guys. Our time is precious as well. And I can see Kevin Sailors needs to get to sleep if it's 3 a.m. in the States. So I'm not here to waste anybody's time. I'm here to share a topic with you all, and I hope it helps your understanding of the sport. And I agree, there's no point in dragging out a presentation for 2 hours when people have other things to do. So, Søren, I'm very happy to do that.
Yeah, okay. You go ahead.
So the second part of Søren's request was the challenges of COVID-19. And this is probably where it gets more and more interesting. As I say, the Global Calendar Unit was set up in January, and we were making plans for 21 and 22 and 2023. February came in and we had our first meeting. And then, of course, March happened and the world fell apart. And if I could just bring you through certain milestones that happened this year. You know, the first event to fall for us was the 2020 World Indoor Championships in Nanjing. So again, you know, to understand the process, World Athletics can't cancel events. The LOC ultimately can make a request to postpone or cancel the event. Clearly, as we all know, the way the world was in the early part of this year, the event was in China. We know the situation that China was in. So Nanjing, requested could they cancel it. At the time, you know, the flights weren't going. There was events being cancelled everywhere. So a decision was made to accept their request. And then, of course, the problem falls on World Athletics is just when to reschedule the event. So it wasn't going to take place in 2020. At the time, we still thought the Olympics was going to happen in 2020. In 2021, the European Indoor Championships, which is a huge event, was already scheduled for Torun in Poland. So we had discussions with European Athletics and they wouldn't change that because they also had subsequent events happening and contracts signed and broadcast agreements in place. And then to go a year later, in 2022, the World Indoor Championships were being held in Belgrade, and they too had paid money for hire of venues, broadcast agreements, etc. So we were in a real pickle as to what to do. But it's probably like everything. I mean, you know, the Chinese definition of a crisis is a threat and an opportunity. So the opportunity was, well, why not go 2 weeks after the European Indoors in 2021? And of course, the initial outcry is no way, it can't happen, etc. But we spoke to a number of athletes and they said 2 weeks is probably about enough time that it could happen. So we rescheduled it for 2022 or 2021, just after the European Indoors. And we thought life would return to normal because this, of course, as President Donald Trump will tell us all, is a China disease and it didn't affect the rest of the world at that particular time in February. And as I said, the next slide then probably says it all. We thought Nanjing was a unique one-off event, but of course it was just the start of a domino effect. And who could have imagined within a month of that happening, all the various changes that happened? We had the World Half Marathon Championships. I remember the discussion really well. We had World Half Marathon Championships scheduled for the end of March, and things were starting to get a little bit hairy in the international world. And John Ridgen rang and said, when can we have this event rescheduled? So I went through the whole autumn calendar, looked at all the world marathon majors. We wanted to have the top stars running. So we looked at New York Marathon, Berlin Marathon, Chicago Marathon, tried to get a date that worked. In the end, I remember we had a date that was on the same weekend as the Amsterdam Marathon and one of the ones in Poland. We rang the organizers, we agreed, we announced a date in September. And then, of course, we realized it wasn't going to happen in September either. And after that, within a week or two of that happening, Tokyo was changed. So we'd already postponed the World Half Marathon from March to September. It'd been rechanged then to October. The great news is, and I'm sure you all know, that the World Half Marathon did take place, and it's one of the very few World Championships which took place in any sport in the world in 2020. So there was a great pride and a great credit. And also, I have to say, a great piece of luck as well, because Gdynia was 2 weeks ago, I think. If Gdynia was today, I'm not sure the Polish authorities could have it. So we're living in such a fluid world that things are changing. You can say week to week, but even day to day. And as I say, you know, Germany and France went into lockdown yesterday. You know, the word in this morning's media is that Britain's going into lockdown on Monday morning. We're already in lockdown in Ireland. So things are changing from day to day. And in fact, even in Ireland, we had the European Cross Country Championships due to take place in September. And in December, we also had to cancel that. So things happen quickly. The Olympics was the big one when that was rescheduled, and it happened really quickly. And maybe to give you a little bit of an idea of the discussions around that, I'll discuss it better in general. But the cost of rescheduling on people, so all the team, they probably have 3,000 or 4,000 staff working in Tokyo. They would all have to be paid for another 12 months. And some of them had jobs and families and were doing secondments. The venues would have been booked out. They would have been booked out for different commercial events 12 months later. You know, the volunteers, all the tickets that they'd sold, all the flights that were sold, all the hotels that were booked for officials and guests and sponsors. It was such a huge amount of financial impact. But in the end, I think common sense took place. Japan realized they couldn't organize it. The IOC were grateful that, you know, that there was an agreement made and it was rescheduled to 2021. And I'll explain that in more detail in a few slides' time as to explain exactly the impact of the 2021 Olympic Games in Tokyo. The World Under-20s were then the next on our agenda in Nairobi in July 2020. Clearly, they couldn't happen. But the good news on that front is when we were looking for a date, just to give you an idea of the politics around the change of a date, I think the Kenyan presidential elections next year are the end of June. So the Kenyan LOC said, please, can we have the championships before the election? Because we don't know what's going to happen with the election, etc. But we couldn't have a World Championships in June. It would just kill the season for the European athletes and the American athletes. So as much as Kenya, and it could be any country, but as much as an LOC wants to do the right thing for their country, whether it's dates, holidays, elections, whatever political decisions, even venues, World Athletics has to take a decision for the good of the whole world. An LOC can't dictate the date of the event. World Athletics has to take that decision. So on that, I'll just do 10 minutes left, sir, and I'll follow your direction on this.
Go on. You continue, and then we take everything in the next session. We take all the questions in the next session.
No, just see, we've 10 minutes to go before we cut off. So you tell me when you want to cut off.
Yeah,
but anyway, bottom line was we rang 18 national federations to see would August 2020 suit, or August 2021 suit for the World Under-20s, and they agreed that that was the most opportune time. But from our point of view, particularly in Europe and the United States, we always felt that a July World Under-20s was just too much happening in July. There was national championships, there was Diamond League, the athletes were finished school, there was just too much happening. So we have managed now to push the World Under-20s into August, middle August, because that's what all the federations wanted. And I would suggest from 2021 onwards, the World Under-20s will always happen in August, which means for those young athletes who are training and they've got education in school, the reality is now they've got a longer summer season. So that was a win-win from our side. The Diamond League, we expected 15 Diamond League events. They very clearly, they started cancelling as opposed to postponing. We saw Oslo doing a great job with the Impossible Games. We saw Zurich doing a great job with the Inspirational Games, having people from around the world. However, we're all traditional athletics fans, and we all realize that it's not real athletics when you got somebody in Zurich and somebody in the United States and somebody in France competing with an iPhone streaming in the back garden. And it's just, we all know what our athletics is. It was great that we had something, and it was like the back garden challenge. It was brilliant to have something, but we wanted to have our traditional sport back. And then we have the Continental Tour, which I'll explain to you as well, which is a different model to the Diamond League. Mostly the Diamond League didn't really happen in its traditional guise. Thankfully, the Continental Tour happened this year and probably saved the sport over the summer. There was such good events, all available on the World Athletics YouTube channel. Just to give you an idea of what happened. So the plan for 2020 on the Continental Tour, this is another one of my jobs. So I was the guy who came up with the idea of the Continental Tour, and we established it and launched it in 2020. We had 10 meetings planned on 4 continents from May to September. And you can see Nanjing obviously sticking out there a mile, which was going to be a challenge anyway. What we ended up with was 7 meetings on 3 continents from August to September. So very few of the meetings actually happen on their date. And there was a big coordination piece between the Global Calendar Unit and the Diamond League organisers and the Continental Tour organisers. And we also tried to have a weekend for national championships to ensure that the calendar was coordinated. Because it's easy to cancel an event. It's not so easy to find a new date that works for everybody afterwards. Just to give you an idea of how it worked with the Continental Tour. Of the 7 meetings, 3 of them cancelled. So Hengelo, Nanjing and Kingston, they all had different reasons for cancelling, but they couldn't take place. We rescheduled 5 of them: Ostrava, Turku, Szehesfehérvár in Hungary, Nairobi and Tokyo. Tokyo was a challenge because the Japanese authorities weren't allowing international athletes into Japan, but we made some flexible changes with them to ensure that they had the Continental Tour because it was taking place in the Olympic Stadium. And then we had just 2 events out of the whole 10 that took place as scheduled. Silesia in Poland and Zagreb both took place in September. And I have to say as well, there was a lot of luck involved in that. So we can say, great, we had 7 meetings out of Continental Tour. It was a big success. If they were 1 month later, they couldn't have happened because obviously October, the second wave of the coronavirus happened. So what I would suggest to you guys, when you're doing fixtures at home, is take your opportunity. If it goes back to a reasonably good level, get as much athletics in as possible, because you never know what's going to happen with the current environment that we're living in with coronavirus. So now I just want to talk about the impact of moving Tokyo 2020. So first of all, Thomas Bach announced, the IOC announced that we take place in July 2021. We had the World Athletics Championships in Eugene in August 2021. So we looked at, yeah, you're right to be celebrating, Kevin, but we looked at all the various options that we had here. We wanted to go late August for a start, and late August meant that the University of Oregon students were back in university, or we'd no accommodation, etc. So it couldn't happen in late August 2021. So then we looked at 2022, and 2022 we had the Commonwealth Games at the end of July, which affects 70 countries in the world, with the European Championships and with the North American Championships in August, which affects, maybe probably about 100 countries in the world. But yet, the World Athletics Championships is the jewel in the crown of our World Athletics series of events. So in the end, we made a recommendation. We also had golf. There was US Masters golf. So the broadcast schedule was very, very complicated to ensure we had prime time. But we did do a deal with all the various broadcasters, and we proposed a date in the middle of July, which gave 10 days to the Commonwealth Games, which the athletes said worked. And then we had to work with the Commonwealth Games to change their dates to give 10 days to the European Championships and North American Championships. And in the end, it wasn't ideal for everybody. It wasn't perfect, but it was nobody's fault. There was nothing we could do about this. It was just the way it was. But what it means then, we've 3 major championships in 6 weeks in 2022. So as a fan, that's magical. If you're a 5,000 meter runner, a steeplechaser, or a long distance athlete, that might be a little bit harder to do. But it should be a magical summer in 2022. And then, of course, we have a new cycle of global events. 2021 Olympics, 2022, I'm sorry, that should say 22 and 23 World Championships, and then 2024 Olympics. So it is exciting, and who knows what it might do for the future of the cycle of major athletic championships. But it just shows you the impact a decision to take to cancel or to postpone the Olympic Games in Tokyo. So probably at a good time, sir, and that's with 4 minutes left before we lose our connection. That will hopefully give you a feeling or a view of the effect of COVID-19. When you hear these decisions, you have to think of the people. And first and foremost, you think of the athletes who've been training. And then you think of all the kind of employees, the workers, the volunteers. And then somebody, and it's a global calendar unit, may have to make decisions along with will have to make proposals for the council to make decisions as to when to reschedule. And as I said before, it certainly wasn't the 2020 plan that we all had. So, Søren, happy to hand it over to you, and I don't know if you want to log out, but I'll let you take it up from here.
Yeah, you can transfer back the host to me. What we have a question is that, of course, you are trying to plan ahead, and John from Trinidad and Tobago was asking, are we preparing protocols for events in the new normal in dealing with COVID-19?
Can you repeat that again?
Are you preparing new protocols ahead in dealing with COVID-19 for your competitions?
Yes, we are. For sure we are. I mean, for example, Gdynia, the World Half Marathon Championships was a huge piece of work in terms of all the protocols of athletes. First of all, the athletes arriving. Second of all, the officials involved, spectators. I mean, I don't want to say this, but we're going to have to get used to behind closed doors. I think that's the reality. Behind closed doors, indoors, maybe behind closed doors, outdoors. It's terrible that we've always wanted to have a full stadium, but that's the way it seems to be going. So, yeah, I think that's the big thing. I think the medics, World Athletics have protocols in place. I think they're available on the website, but certainly for national federations that you can just obviously download them. And I know a lot of national championships this year took place. I mean, in Ireland, we have normally 2 days of national championships, but in the end, I think we had 9 different sessions this year to ensure the venue athletes could come in, compete, leave, and we'd be fulfilling the criteria for the government protocol.
Yeah, we have a question here from Samuel. He says, can we say our sport is doing very well minus COVID challenge? In the light, let me get this out of the way. With all the difficulties in scheduling and rescheduling.
Well, I think we're doing exceptionally well. I think if you look at all the Olympic sports, I think it's fair to say that athletics has probably responded in the best possible way. We're the only one that had a World Championships. We had a reasonable season of Diamond League and Continental Tour events, and most countries had their national championships and adapted to the environment of COVID protocols and competing without spectators. So I would suggest as a sport that we've done very, very well.
Yeah. If the health conditions do not allow for sporting events in 2021, what happens next?
I was going to say we've less than a minute, Surin.
Yeah,
Before we
so we take that in the next session.
Start when we log in.
Yeah. So we will connect immediately on the same link, and we will have an open discussion on this. We will invite your questions from each and every one of you. You just unmute your mic, and then you'll be able to talk. Okay, so see you all in a few seconds as soon as this one stops. Reconnect on the same link. So we'll allow a few minutes for our friends to connect, and then it will be an open session. So anyone can ask questions directly by just simply unmuting your phone and unmuting your mic, and then ask your questions in an orderly fashion.
Yes, sir. I have a question. Can I ask, please?
Yes, go ahead. Yes, we can start now. You can unmute your mic.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah, sure. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Do you want me to, just before we ask that question, do you want me to finish? I didn't answer
Yeah,
the last
please
question.
finish what the last one first.
Yeah, so I think the last question is from Samuel, if I remember right. And I think the question was, what happens if there's no change in COVID in 21? Is that correct,
Yes.
Sam? Yeah, well, if I could answer that question, I probably wouldn't be doing a free speech on a Saturday morning. What happens in 2021? Well, let's be clear on a couple of things as I see it, and I'm not a medical expert, so I'm answering this question as purely a guy who follows the news and tries to understand what's happening. First and foremost, we're told about being in close proximity to large groups. I was at a conference 2 weeks ago, an e-conference, and we had a professional speaking about COVID outdoors, and he said effectively running outdoors, the chances of getting COVID from running in a group, in reasonably small groups, are next to nothing. So that was the first thing that he said. It's effectively, even in a group of people, 15 people, if one person has COVID and he's coughing and spluttering and they're out on a run, the chances of the other guys getting it are very, very small. That was his view. And the reason being was because he felt it blows it out. But what we understand is that if you're indoors, and you're touching your mouth and all those kind of things, that's the threat of it, rather than the outdoor activity, which is seen as number healthy. So that's number one. I'd say number two, the way things happened this summer, the summer gone by, with events taking place, whether they be national championships, continental tour events, all the rest of it, there wasn't one report in Europe of any event, athletics event, which had a positive COVID test as a result of the activity. So that to me would suggest all the officials wore masks. There was cleansing going on starting blocks and hurdles and high jump bars and all the touch points that COVID gets transferred on. And I also think then the number 3 point is, as a sport, athletics is quite, I would say, following the rules. So I think everybody abided by the rules, but there wasn't one report. So Spain, for example, we all saw Spain last April. Huge number of COVID positives, huge number of tests. They've had 90 national championships this year, 90, and not one COVID positive result on any of them. Now, obviously, they've adapted them. They've had no spectators, probably no coaches. They've had all the normal social distancing protocols, etc. So when you hear stuff like that, you tend to get a bit positive and think, fine, well, as a sport, maybe we're one of the better sports. Clearly, football and some of the contact sports is a little bit different. But as a sport in athletics, you know, you see everybody shaking hands on the elbow and that type of thing. So by and large, I think our athletes and our officials have followed the rules. So I think that's a positive. So let's go on then to the indoor season, which is the next thing, because we probably have three different angles. We have indoor track and field, we have outdoor track and field, and then we have the road running situation. So indoors, for example, some of the World Indoor Tour events are already planning to take place in smaller venues with no spectators. So you're probably going to see things like when you watch the football matches now, the fake crowd noise. That's what they're looking at now for the World Indoors in terms of trying to create some sort of atmosphere for the athletes. The athletes want to compete. I think we all know that. They train hard. They want to compete. Of course, they'd rather compete in front of a full stadium. But if they have a choice between not competing or else competing in front of an empty stadium, I think they'll choose that. So I think that's what I realize the future is. It's clear that a day or a week is a long time in COVID. As of today, we're still in October. You know, the indoor season is effectively February. It's a long way to go. And we all have to hope, and you would hope that a vaccine will come in point. I see a situation where I would walk up to a stadium, whether it's a football stadium as a spectator or even an athletic stadium, and I'd have a little card in my pocket which would say I have been vaccinated, and so I'm allowed in and mixed with people versus somebody who hasn't received the vaccine yet. I think we'll see things like that. But other than that, Sam, I don't know any more than you. I know that we have to plan. I know the mass marathons would struggle because they are a big business. I mean, New York Marathon, 50 and 60,000 people, London Marathon, 40,000. They've already taken the decision not to happen in the spring. So you have all the marathon majors now taking place in September, October, November, which will create its own problems for the elite fields. But they're effectively saying, we don't believe it's going to be things are back to normal by March or April. There's lots of talk of vaccine coming on in the next couple of months. And they're hedging their bets and going in 9 months' time. Clearly, the world can't operate in a lockdown fashion and people keep talking about having to live with the virus. And I think what athletics did this year in terms of masks, hygiene, spectators, officials, I think is a really good job. And I hope we don't have to do that for very much longer, but I fear we may have to do it for another year. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes. We have a question which concerns a lot of us also, is about the para athletics. Do you also coordinate with the para-athletics also in terms of when setting up and establishing the World Athletics calendar?
No, it's a very simple answer. The World Para-Athletics has its own national federation or its own international federation, so it doesn't come under the World Athletics banner. So we haven't coordinated with them so far. We're not involved in the rule setting for the World Para-Athletics. So very simply, we're not involved, unfortunately. Happy to help them if they wanted, but there's no engagement, and they haven't asked for help. So I'm assuming they're reasonably comfortable the way they are with their own calendar.
Okay. So there's no coordination between the two international federations.
No.
So anyone wants to have a question?
Yeah, I have a question, sir.
Yes. Go ahead.
Well, you said the World Champ, we are from Uzbekistan, and you said the World Championship was rescheduled to 2022, yeah?
Yes.
Well, what about Asian Games? We have Asian Games taking place in that year. So doesn't it take at the same time? Like we have Para-Asian Games at that time.
So I'm going to answer that question. I think the Asian Games is October, if I'm right, September, October in 2022. Is that correct? Yeah, it is. So in reality, yeah. Let's be clear.
So we don't it doesn't take place at the same time.
Yeah, it doesn't clash. It doesn't clash. But I was just going to say as well, and this is probably an interesting discussion to go down. I've showed everybody the calendar hierarchy, and top of the hierarchy is the World Athletic Series events, which is the World Championships. The Asian Games for our calendar is 4th or 5th in the hierarchy. We realize that the Asian Games is 40 sports. It's not just athletics, but in that respect, we've managed to avoid a clash, and they can both happen in the same year, so there isn't an issue.
Thank you, sir.
Anyone
else? Can I comment?
Yes, go ahead, Kevin.
So Pierce, I know that when the rescheduling for many events into 2022 took place, President Koh talked about having those 3 major events in 6 weeks, and it would be great for the sport. I think we've gotten kind of lucky in that the major event normally in the summer of 2022 is the Football World Cup, and that will be in Doha in November, December. So maybe World Athletics can be thanked for pioneering using Doha as a place for a high-level event, but they couldn't go in the summer, and we get to take advantage of that.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. No, you're absolutely right. And I worked in Doha for 9 months on the World Championships, so I know very well the situation. You're right. I mean, there's probably the broadcast market is really important when setting the calendar. So, for example, even the European Football Championship, which is a huge event from a television point of view, was supposed to be in June this year, and there was practically no Diamond Leagues taking place in that month because they couldn't get television coverage. And now, obviously, the football was cancelled in 2021 as well. So that created the same problems next year, and it really created a difficult situation. I would say, you know, as the ad goes, it's good to talk. And the one thing that we've done as a global calendar unit is we've talked to everybody. We understand the situation. I mean, in the olden days, a date was announced, and then the likes of our friend in Uzbekistan would be saying, hey, how is this clashing with the Asian Games? How is this possible? It's not fair in our athletes, etc. The same situation would happen. You know, somebody would say, oh, the broadcast market can't cover your event. So there's been a lot of communication this year. And, you know, I was laughing with Seb at a point in time when we were getting into the detail for the Eugene World Championships in 22. The US Masters Golf was on that weekend. So NBC said, no way, we're not taking the World Track and Field Championships. And I said, we can manage to do the sessions around the golf. And it's a preliminary round. And, you know, there's a lot of challenges with Eugene anyway, because I know one of the sessions is just throws early days because the way that the configuration of the track. So there's always a way around it, but it's good to talk. And there probably wasn't a department specifically for a calendar at world level in years gone by. And I would say, you know, it was, thank God we had it established when COVID came in, because otherwise it would have been, you know, a lot longer to get decisions made. And the one thing athletes and coaches need is a little bit of certainty. And at least the dates were rescheduled on a timely fashion.
Thanks, Pierce.
But I think it's important, Kevin. It's important for everybody to understand what Kevin said is right. If the FIFA World Cup was in June, as it normally is, and then you've all the golf majors, and you got the Tour de France, and you have Wimbledon, and you have the French Open tennis, and you've all these competing events for television coverage, that's when you're in serious problem. And, you know, we had our World Championship in Doha last year, end of September, beginning of October, which was in the middle of the football season. And that would have always have been an issue in the past. We can't compete with American football or the Champions League in Europe and all these big events. But in the end, the athletes' performances were very good. And the television figures were also quite high. So I think as a sport, sometimes we lack our confidence, you know, to make decisions. But in reality, the athletes would have said, it's way too late and I'm preparing for Tokyo and it's too hot, with all these different issues. But in the end, it was probably one of the best World Championships ever in terms of performance, and it was one of the highest ever in terms of television ratings. Whatever about spectators in the stadium, let's not go there.
Yes, someone else?
Yes. Yes, Ren.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question. What is the impact on the rescheduling all these events and competitions in terms of media coordination and sponsors? Because at a certain point, some athletes should sacrifice some events and don't participate in. And due to this sacrifice or not participating, will this impact also the participation of sponsors and media coverage?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I sort of touched on it in the last answer. I should say two things. Number one, the Global Calendar Unit is in constant contact with the Athletes Commission as well at World Athletics level. So the athletes are part of the decision-making process, and there's 2 athletes on the World Athletics Council, etc. So they're part of that process. We also have broadcast representatives on it. We fundamentally, before we make a decision to reschedule any event from X to Y, we need to make sure that the event can be shown on TV, that the venue, is available, etc. Like, for example, just to give you a small example, the World Athletic Championships in London in 2017, I was the director of operations for that championships. That stadium, which we would call the Olympic Stadium in our language, is actually the West Ham United Premier League Stadium as well. So clearly, athletics has 10 days or 2 weeks every year that we can use that stadium. But we can't go into the Premier League season, just because the amount of money involved, the amount of broadcast involved. So all of those situations take up a decision. I'll give you another example. The World Cross Country was scheduled for Bathurst in Australia. I'm just trying to get it right, in next year. So it's scheduled for March next year. So let me explain some of the discussion we had to make. Australia at the moment is cut off from the rest of the world. We had to take into account the bushfires, which happened this year. Way before coronavirus, we saw all those terrible bushfires in Australia. We had to take in the weather situation. So we wanted to move that cross country into February because the World Half Marathon was going to be in March. And then they were telling us things like, it's going to be too hot, we have to have it early in the morning, etc. And actually, if you remember, the World Cross Country was originally scheduled to have the same day as the World Indoors in Nanjing, the same weekend, which was a disaster for everybody. So at least coronavirus has changed that for us. So there's always a competing discussion. You know, what you said about athletes, suiting athletes, broadcast, the venue, the sponsors, the city. I mean, there's times that an event can take place only during a holiday period because the traffic is too heavy or whatever. So all of that coordination is part of the decision, of the recommendations from the Global Calendar Unit to the World Athletics Council. And of course, the council make the decision, but we would have all our arguments made and the council would normally rubber stamp a date. I'll give you one more example. Sorry, Søren. Let me just explain. It's a little bit jumping ahead. So the indoor season, and I know indoors isn't huge in Africa, but it's a big part of the sport in Europe and in North America and in some parts of Asia. So we have traditionally boxed everything into the month of February. So we have national championships, World Indoor Tour, everything happening in the month of February, and the World Indoors are normally the first or the second week of March. And we have to have 2 weeks between the closing date of entries and the first day of competition. So I brought all the big federations together this year in a conversation, the US, the big six European, to discuss how best to do it. Because at the last World Indoors in 2018 in Birmingham, I'm sure Kevin remembers, 1 week after the championships finished, and I remember the last event was Poland setting a world record in the 4x4. 1 week later, the NCAAs took place. So all the top college athletes didn't go to Birmingham. And I think the top 2 teams in the 4x4 ran faster than Poland ran the week before. So clearly there's something wrong if we're saying, well, that's the best relay team in the world ever. And then a week later, 2 college teams run faster. And that record wasn't ratified. But that's a long story. So I was conscious to try to coordinate a calendar whereby the World Indoors would be the conclusion of an indoor season. And it would be held after the NCAAs. And I was also conscious to try and have 1 weekend of the year, which would be national championships for indoors weekend. So I brought all the federations together and we had the usual situation of, well, we have the Six Nations rugby and the main TV guys won't cover it. And the US were saying, well, we have to adapt ourselves to NCAA. And then we had the World Indoor Championships next week. And, they were telling us we have to book our flights 2 weeks in advance or it's too expensive. And there was so many different competing options. So what we managed to do, and I'll happily share the situation with you. In 2022, we have agreement from everybody that February would only be for World Indoor Tour meetings. And I was going to say, watch the World Indoor Tour grow, because there's a number of meetings in the United States that want to be part of the World Indoor Tour going forward. So this is 2022. But the one thing we had to do was national championships the first weekend of March, NCAA is the middle weekend, and then finish with the World Indoors on, I think, the 17th or the 18th of March, which is 1 week later than what's in the calendar at the moment. So everybody has agreed to this at the moment, except the Athletes Commission. And the Athletes Commission are saying, 2022, we have Eugene in the middle of July. If we go 1 week later, it's less time to prepare for the outdoor season, etc. And I'm saying, guys, it's 5 days. It's like an injury. It's like somebody getting sick. It's not going to be that big effect on your life. But what it will mean to the calendar is that the whole month of February and 2 weeks of January would just be for World Indoor Tour. So it's a chance for the sport to be promoted. It's a chance for the athletes to earn more money. And it's a chance for the top athletes to race each other more and more and just make our sport more exciting. And I should also say, guys, the World Indoor Tour next year will all be available on the World Athletics YouTube channel for the first time ever. So the Millows Games is 113 years old. It's never before been available in Europe. It'll be available live now in Europe, Africa, and the rest of the world on the World Athletics YouTube channel. So it's a big success for the sport as well. All we need to do is to make sure it happens. It's as easy as that. But you can see, Abdul, just with your question, you can see the amount of different people who are impacted by a decision. And as I say, we're down to 5 days and the athlete's saying this could be detrimental for my preparation for Eugene and the European Championships. So that's the level of detail we go into before we make a decision. I'm not sure that level of detail took place before the Global Calendar Unit.
It's simply incredible. Thank you for sharing all this with us, Piers. We just can't even start to imagine how much you need to go through. I mean, your unit has to go through to try to get something coordinated going on. Anyone? Yes, anyone has a question?
Well, Søren, just to say two things. You're right about the coordination, but I have to say everybody's been very supportive. Everybody has supported. There's nobody, I feel, that has tried to stop the progress of the calendar because it just makes common sense. And probably before, we have so many situations in Europe where two diamond leagues want to take place on the exact same day. So, and I can tell